Well, hey there, guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're making some dice. Well, a little while ago on the show, I believe it was for the laser projects for Father's Day, I showed you guys some dice that I had gotten from the local dollar store, and we engraved chores on them for chore dice. And I have had so many emails and questions asking me, Kenny, we don't have a dollar store. They don't carry dice. How can we make our own? And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make some dice, but either way, we're going to get into the process of making these dice. And it all starts off with a little bit of scrap, in this case, poplar. Well, I had this scrap of poplar up in the rack. You don't have to use poplar, guys. You can use whatever you have. You can use cherry, you can use walnut, you can use maple, pine, anything. They are dice, and they pretty much lend themselves to any kind of stock. But this was a piece of scrap that I had up there, and this is a great scrap wood project. So this measures a little more than 1 inch by 1 inch. It's quite a bit more than 1 inch by 1 inch here, but we are going to cut it down to that. So the first thing that we want to check is to see if any of these edges here are square, because if they're square, that is going to be our starting point. If not, we're going to need a flat square edge. And these two here seem to be square. So all I'm going to do is on the end, I'm going to mark them as our square edge. So I know that this has to be down at the table surface, and this edge needs to be up against the fence. And once we're happy with that, we're going to set our fence at 1 inch, and I'm going to rip this all the way along one edge to give us the 1 inch wide, and then rotate it 90 degrees and cut the other side to end up giving us a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of stock. And before we carry on, we'll just make sure our measurements are right. 1 inch and 1 inch. So we're good there. Our next step now is we're going to take this over to the table saw, and we're going to square off one edge. Don't take off too much material here. You just want to square up the end using your miter fence. So it's now time to cut our dice into their individual blocks. So I have our small parts cutting jig that we made here on the show. If you don't know what this is about, I'll post a link to it down below. I have a 1, 2, 3 setup block and a length of our 1x1 poplar. So guys, I have this setup block at a 3-inch side, because as I said when we made this jig, I like to give 3 inches of space between the offcut and our stop block. And all we're going to do is slide this 1, 2, 3 block over. We're going to use our actual stock for our thickness, or for our cut gauge. And once we're happy with how that is, we're going to tighten down our stop block, and we'll just test here to see, you know what, that's a little tight. That's not going to yield a good cut. So we're going to loosen that off a little bit, and we'll tighten it back up. Let me just see how that is. Not bad. We might need a little more, but I'm going to test it. I'm going to do a test cut. And the guys, this is where this jig here really excels. So you want to slide your stock over into place. We'll remove our 1, 2, 3 setup block, and then we can follow through with the cut. You just want to make sure that your blade is raised high enough that when it passes through, it's actually going to cut through your stock. I don't know if you can see that, but that there is 1 inch. So we now have one cube, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. Now I didn't use the hold down there because I have enough stock to hold to cut that piece. But I will be adjusting this now and using my hold down, and we're going to cut up the rest of our stock to get our 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch cubes. And there we go. But we're not going to want to play with these. They're a little rough. So I have some 220 grit sandpaper mounted to MDF, and we're just going to give these a light sanding. But guys, you don't want to sand them a lot. You don't want to take away any of their dimension. So it's just a matter of 1, 2, 3, 4 passes. That's it. Nice and smooth. Flip it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Flip it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Flip it. Same thing. And then you can do the end grain. There you go. Sand it, dice. So we now want to round off all of these sharp, sharp corners. And for that, we're going to head over to the router table. Well, in order to round over all the sides on our dice, we have our small parts routing jig that we made here not too long ago on the show. Truth be told, it was actually made specifically with this project in mind. I have the jig set up to hold our 1" by 1" cubes. And when I did the initial video where I flew by the seat of my pants to make this jig, I initially did the setup so that the bearing was riding perfectly flush with our fence. And I actually found that to be a little bit cumbersome. So after working with it a little bit and tweaking of the jig, I found that if the bearing is just slightly proud, and I mean slightly, like not even for you metric people, not even a millimeter, like 1/64 of an inch, just to barely get it proud of that fence, it gives you more control of your routing on the surfaces while still allowing you to utilize the fence for the support of the jig. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off on one of the long grain sides. So we'll just place it in the jig and route the long grain side. We will then rotate it. It doesn't matter clockwise or counterclockwise until we get all 4 of the bottom surfaces routed. And once you get that done, we're just going to take our die out of here, flip it over so that your routed surfaces now are on the top, and we're going to repeat the process on the opposite side of our dice or die. And at this point, you will have the top and the bottom with a round over, but we have 4 edges here that are not rounded over. So we're going to do that now, but instead of rotating it this way, we will be rotating it from front to back or back to front, however you want to do it. But we can do those 4 surfaces as well. And now that all corners or all edges have been taken off this die, we can take it back over to the bench. Now the routing of these blocks of wood does leave a little bit of a nub in each one of the corners. So I have a piece of 220 grit sandpaper, and it doesn't take much. A couple swipes on each corner, as long as you hold on to it. A couple swipes on each corner smooths that out beautifully and really finishes it off. And it just takes a couple seconds to do it. It's not a necessary step, but it really does make the difference between a good looking wooden die or something that was just thrown together. And there you go. So I'm going to get all of these done. I don't even know how many we cut here. 2, 4, 6, 8. I've got 2 more, so that's 10. I'm going to get all 10 of them routed, and I'll show you what you end up with. And it doesn't take long before you get all 10 of these, in my case 10, routed and ready for the sanding step. Now, guys, let's just have a look at this routing. I really want to point something out here. So many people take their jigs for granted and, oh, it's a safety jig, so I can get careless. Have a look at the routing process here. The piece is placed into the jig and the first pass is routed. If you'll note, my hands never leave the back of the jig. They're never beyond the fence. They're always in behind it. And then when that quick routing is done, I pull it back well beyond where that router bit is spinning. And even though the router bit is spinning inside the fence, it still has areas of the cutter head protruding outside of it that can easily take off the tips of your fingers. Depending on what size of a bit you're using, it can cause even more damage. But look at where I am making the adjustments. Way outside, on the very outside edge of the table. I make those adjustments. Both hands go behind the jig, and both hands serve the purpose of sliding the jig into place. Once that cut is done, same process. Both hands behind the fence or behind the hold downs, dragging that jig outside of the cutting area right to the edge of the router table to make the adjustment again, well out of the way of that spinning router bit. Guys, this is production work. And I've said it so many times on the show here. Production work is some of the most dangerous work you will ever do here in the shop. And it's not because the process itself is dangerous. We've made a jig here to make the process extremely safe. However, the danger comes into play with complacency. Because of that repetitive motion, you have a tendency to allow your mind to wander. You have a tendency to become complacent and not necessarily pay attention to where your hands are. You have to force yourself into that mental state that I just explained. 2 hands on the jig, completely away from the cutting area. Make your adjustments at the edge of the table. 2 hands behind the jig, into the cutting area. Make your pass. 2 hands pulling it away. You have to continue that and run it through in your mind. Don't start singing songs. Don't start thinking about what am I going to do at work tomorrow. Don't start thinking, hey, you know what? I got to cut the grass when I'm done this. Don't think of anything but the process that you're doing, because even though it's something as simple as dice, or in a die in this one case, but something as simple as dice, you can lose your fingers just as quickly making a simple project as what you can making an intricate one. Nobody is above that. Nobody is beyond that. Nobody is immune to the dangers of this shop. So please, guys, when it comes to production work, I know you guys have asked for this video, and this jig was made specifically for this project, and it will serve me well in other projects as well. But please keep in mind, when doing production work, keep your wits about you. Do not become complacent. Do not become a statistic. And there you have it. How to safely, I emphasize safely, cut dice blocks. Guys, this project really morphed. It all started off with a Father's Day laser engraving project where we made some gifts for Dad, and I took it for granted that there was access for the majority to, say, a dollar store or a place that sold those pre-made dice. Not thinking, of course, that what if you don't have access to the dollar store, or what if you do, but they don't carry that particular product? So then that morphed into, hey, Kenny, how can I cut these dice and how can I do it safely? I'm not sure how to do it. I can't get access to the dice. I really like to make them and engrave them or wood burn them, but I have no access to that. So then that turned into, well, you know what? Now I'm going to do a show on cutting the dice, but we can't do the show with cutting the dice unless we make a jig to be able to safely route them. And while you can hand sand them, nothing beats that professional look of that really clean 1/8 round over on all sides. So that, of course, morphed into the jig, which then, of course, morphed into this show of cutting the dice, which will most likely, I would say, morph into a tutorial for Lightburn on how to make different types of dice or specialty dice using your laser engraver and how to make those patterns. I think if you guys have an interest in that, maybe we'll do that, because I'm sure some of you out there have the laser engravers and aren't really sure about how to go about making a pattern for dice. So maybe that's what we're going to do. If there's an interest, you let me know and we'll take care of it. Either way, guys, these are very easy to do and you can do them very safely, but take your time to make the jigs. Don't try to do it all like, halfway. Don't try to just say grab a hand screw clamp. While that will work, it's also a little awkward and very time consuming. If you don't clamp it in properly each time, then you're running into issues with that block possibly coming out, whereas the jig holds it on 4 sides, left, right, back, and the top. So it has support from 4 sides out of 6. And honestly, it's, in my opinion, the safest way to do this project. So, guys, if you are interested in that jig or the small parts cutting jig, either one of them, I'm going to post the link to both of those below. But either way, I hope that with this show here, those of you that have asked how to make the dice, I hope you're going to take the initiative to make these jigs. And I hope this has been helpful to you so that you know how to cut your own. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. This one's a little different. How many shows out there on YouTube show you how to cut a cube? I don't know. But either way, you guys asked for it, and here it is. Guys, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We have an amazing audience base here, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of it. I hope you've enjoyed today's program, guys. I hope, like I said, that you're going to make these jigs and cut these dice for yourself. I hope that if you're getting into production work in your shop, that you're being mindful of what you're doing and not letting your mind wander to keep yourself as safe as you can. And more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.